Welcome back to the Legacy Crusaders YouTube channel. This is Benji, and you're here for another segment of Ask Judgeman. And we're going to start off by actually talking about a ruling I had stated on the previous video. After a short conversation with our team war leader, Jarkvos, we had a discussion about whether I was right about the ruling of Wabaku versus the ruling on something similar like Card of Demise, and we're going to take a look at what happens with that. And then we're going to take a look at some card effects related to timing and missing the timing. So the ruling I discussed yesterday was that a Chaos Max Dragon could not destroy a Raid Raptor Ultimate Falcon in battle under the effects of Wabaku, because under the effects of Wabaku, Chaos Max Dragon did not inflict any battle damage to a Raid Raptor Ultimate Falcon, and in order to destroy a monster by battle, you need to inflict greater than or equal to its attack points in battle damage to that monster. Whereas people would assume that Wabaku states that a monster can't be destroyed in battle, and that's why it wasn't destroyed. So his question had to do with how is that different from Card of Demise, which says that you take no damage for the rest of the turn. So here's the comparison. Wabaku states that your monsters inflict no battle damage, meaning they don't actually inflict damage required to destroy a monster, whereas the damage being referred to on Card of Demise states that you take no damage, referring to damage to your life points. So that's where the difference is there. So in case there's any questions about damage, battle damage is what monsters inflict upon each other when they battle, whereas damage is what is received to the life points. And the only way to distinguish battle damage versus effect damage is to call one effect damage versus battle damage, although we really shouldn't be calling damage inflicted by monsters battle damage, in addition to the damage inflicted to your life points in battle, also battle damage, which is a bit confusing, and I'd like to get away from. So next we're going to take a look at a card interaction that happened at my locals the other day. It had to do with Maiden with Eyes of Blue, Sage with Eyes of Blue, and Ash Blossom and Joyous Spring. So the question was, if I activate Sage with Eyes of Blue, targeting my Maiden with Eyes of Blue, and my opponent Ash Blossoms the effect of Sage with Eyes of Blue, will I be able to activate Maiden with Eyes of Blue in a new chain? Now, there's a lot of cards that if they meet their trigger, they can actually activate in a new chain, and in this case, Maiden with Eyes of Blue was targeted, regardless of the fact that Sage with Eyes of Blue's effect was negated. Now, the answer to the question is no. And the reason for that is Maiden with Eyes of Blue is not a trigger effect. It's actually a quick play effect. And the reason that you can tell is that Maiden with Eyes of Blue says during either player's turn, which is a pretty big hint that it is a quick play effect. Even more obvious nowadays, a lot of cards will say in parentheses that their effect is a quick play. Maiden doesn't, but by indicating that it can be used during either player's turn, as a monster, it is indicated to be a quick play. Now, some cards are like spell cards, field spells like Pacifist, the Spiral field spell, the Phantasmal Spiral field spell. That is a field spell. It's speed spell 1, so that card effect will activate in a new chain. And additionally, I believe Maiden with Eyes of Blue says when this card is targeted, meaning its effect has to be chained directly to an effect that targets it. So in this case, because of player priority, which is something you can look into here at the Fast Effects timing chart, can be used to determine that you cannot respond after Ash Blossom is activated, because the timing of activation required for Maiden with Eyes of Blue was directly in response to the effect of Sage with Eyes of Blue. So what he really should have been hoping is that his opponent actually did not have an effect that he can chain to the effect of Sage with Eyes of Blue. I'm going to include a link to the Fast Effects timing chart and the page from the official Konami website in the description box below. But this brings up a lot of questions about if effects and when effects, because the Pacifist field spell is an if effect, which means it can always be activated as long as its trigger is met, versus Maiden with Eyes of Blue, which is a when effect, which means it can only be activated in response or at the appropriate time required on its card. So we're going to talk about some other cards that have similar issues at this point in time. So the really basic thing to know is that if a card says, if something happens, you can use this effect, that card can always be used, either at the resolution of a chain or in response to a particular card. But if a card says, when a card when something happens, that card needs to activate. It can only activate if the last thing that happens is that. And that brings up a whole bunch of different types of cards and issues that can occur, specifically when it comes to cards that negate the activation of card effects, or certain cards that can only be activated when cards are destroyed versus when cards are targeted versus when cards are drawn. So a lot of these cards have to be activated with a specific timing where certain cards do not. So we're going to take a look at some differences of those for the remainder of this video. Alright, the following set of cards all have if effects, and that means that they can never miss their timing. If what needed to occur for their effects to trigger, because these are all trigger effects that we're referring to, they will trigger either in a new chain link or after an appropriate timing. So first let's talk about Pacifist, the Phantasm City. So what this card says is, if you do not currently control a token and your opponent activates a card effect, you can special summon the token. So if your opponent activates a card effect, this card will actually trigger in a new chain because it is a speed spell 1 effect. So at the resolution of the current chain, if you currently do not have a token, the effect of Pacifist will trigger as chain link 1, or in a different position in the chain depending on whether there were other card effects that also had if effects also triggered at that point in time. So it will trigger in a new chain no matter what, and it says if, and it says you can, so you don't have to use its effect. But if you do use its effect, it will trigger, you have to trigger it in a new chain. Now, Brow Huntsman of Dark World is a monster whose effect is triggered when it's discarded by a card effect. So let's say you discard it with Dark World Dealings, and then several other cards are chained to that. Brow, as a trigger effect, again, will activate as chain link 1 in a separate chain at the resolution of the current chain. Similarly, True King's Return says, if this card is sent from the field to the graveyard, you can target one monster on the field and destroy it. That effect, because it is a trigger effect, it triggers when the card is sent to the graveyard, or, excuse me, it triggers if this card is sent to the graveyard. Its trigger is met, so as long as it goes from the field to the graveyard, its effect will trigger in a new chain. There is some exceptions for this card, meaning if its activation was negated on the field by something like Dark Bribe, it won't actually have technically gone from the field to the graveyard, so in that case it wouldn't activate. But in all scenarios, unless there's no monster on the field for it to destroy, it will activate in a new chain at the resolution of the current chain. And most of these cards that do have if effects tend to activate in a new chain, and they tend to be speed spell 1. So they'll either be, there'll be some sort of a trigger effect, so the trigger has to be met in order for their card to activate. So now we're going to take a look at a few cards that have when effects, and then all these things apply to all of these cards. Alright? So the following set of cards are a lot of cards that have the statement, when this card is something, activate this effect. So first we're just going to go through these. There are plenty more cards that aren't on this list. Some notable mentions would be Return of the Monarchs or Kuraz, the Heaven Monarch or something of that nature. I forgot his name. Anyways, let's take a look at Gear Town. Gear Town states, if this card is destroyed by a card effect and sent to the graveyard, you can special summon one Ancient Gear monster from your deck. So, this card used to activate a lot because in the original Master Rule, you can set a Gear Town over a Gear Town and it would be destroyed by game mechanics. But now, game mechanics say that if you activate a new field spell or set a new field spell, the current field spell is just sent to the graveyard if it's yours, and if it's your opponent's field spell, yours doesn't leave the field. So, people have had to try more creative ways of destroying their Gear Town. So, if you were to play MST and destroy Gear Town, the chain would resolve, chain link 1, Mystical Space Typhoon destroys Gear Town, meaning the last thing that happened is Gear Town is destroyed, meaning that Gear Town will trigger in the you'll have the option to activate Gear Town in the graveyard and special summon an Ancient Gear monster. But there are ways to make that card miss its timing. For instance, let's say your opponent normal summons a monster, and you activate Torrential Tribute, and then they activate Mystical Space Typhoon in chain to Torrential Tribute, targeting Gear Town. Now, Chain Link 2 will resolve, destroying Gear Town with Mystical Space Typhoon. Then Chain Link 1 will resolve, and Torrential Tribute will resolve, destroying all monsters on the field. Now, the last thing to occur in that chain was that Torrential Tribute destroyed all the monsters on the field, meaning that currently we've missed the timing for Gear Town, because it says when this card is destroyed. This card was destroyed previously in Chain Link 2. So a lot of cards that say when this card is destroyed tend to miss timing if they're destroyed at any chain link higher than chain link 1, because chain link 1 is when it would be at the completion of the current chain, and you'd want your card to trigger at the end of that chain. So you tend to need your card destroyed in chain link 1. That actually happened currently this year in our Yu-Gi-Oh! World Championship, when Marcelo activated a Pot of Duality before targeting a Yang Zing monster to destroy with his effective Masterpiece. You can see that if you watch the Yu-Gi-Oh! World Championship. So let's talk about missing the timing for Yang Zing monsters briefly. So all of the main deck Yang Zing monsters, with the exception of Zafraxi, Treasure of the Yang Zing, all have an effect that says when this card is destroyed by battle or card effect, you can special summon another Yang Zing from your deck. Or in the case of Zafranyu, Secret of the Yang Zing, it would be add a Yang Zing or Zephyr card from your deck to your hand. So these effects say when they are destroyed by battle or card effect. That means the last thing that needs to occur is that they need to have been destroyed. Now, if you're battling a monster, because of the limited amount of cards that can actually be activated in the damage step, and when the monster is destroyed, the card will activate. But in reference to a card being destroyed in the sequence of a chain, these monsters need to be destroyed in Chain Link 1, and it needs to be the last thing that occurs in that chain. So, for instance, if you activate Pot of Duality, and then chain the effect of Zodiac Trident to target a Yang Zing monster, the Yang Zing monster will be destroyed in Chain Link 2, then Pot of Duality will resolve, allowing you to look at the top 3 cards of your deck and add a card to your hand. You cannot trigger the effect of your Yang Zing monster because it was not just destroyed. The card was just added to the hand, so it misses its timing because it needs to be activated when this card is destroyed, not if this card is destroyed. Another card which makes it miss timing in Chain Link 1, which is a more interesting card, is Scarlight, Hot Red Dragon Archfiend. Scarlet Red Dragon Archfiend. Its effect says destroy all special summon monsters on the field, and if you do, inflict 500 damage for each. So, because the damage is the last thing that's inflicted in that effect, the monster is not destroyed last, so it would miss its timing once again. Now, a very current card that this effect, Paleozoics, have a very similar situation that occurred with the card effect earlier with Sage with Eyes of Blue and Maiden with Eyes of Blue. They say, if their graveyard effect says, when a trap card is activated, you can activate this effect, special summon this card as a normal monster. Now, because of player priority, like I mentioned earlier, if you activate a trap card, your opponent then gains priority to play a card effect. So the timing is appropriate for you to activate a Paleozoic monster that's in your graveyard, but if your opponent activates anything that is not a trap card, because they have priority after you play a card, to respond with their own card, any card, unless the card they activate is a trap card, you will miss the opportunity to activate the effect of your Paleozoic trap card in the graveyard, because the last thing that needs to happen is that a trap card need to have been activated. So if you activate, let's say, Mirror Force, and your opponent chains Mystical Space Typhoon, you can no longer activate your Paleozoic trap card from the graveyard. So hopefully these have been some useful examples of how you can miss the timing, force the missing of timing of other cards. If you have more questions on missing the timing, you can leave them down in the comments below. And I'll see you next time. And if you like what you saw, you can find one of our latest uploads right here. Also, YouTube has recommended this video for you. Click here to make sure you subscribe to our channel to get updates as soon as they occur. See you next time.